David Perel said you're the most popular person in Austin, Texas, and you have the most text messages. That's his perception of you. How have you gone about doing that?
I think that it stems, honestly, from I'm really comfortable reaching out to people and having conversations and trying to be helpful and trying to like connect people and stuff. But honestly, I think that I am doing a 4 out of 10 job as a network person. And I think that I want to, in the next 2 years, do a 10 out of 10 job and like be amazing at it.
What does 4 out of 10 look like, and what does 10 out of 10 look like?
4 out of 10 looks like it's not deliberate. I don't have like a personal CRM. I'm not hosting things intentionally. I don't have structure around when I catch up with people and all this sort of thing. 10 out of 10 is hosting way more things, having like a weekly or every other week, I'm going to do a happy hour or a barbecue at my house, invite 40 people, having like a friend newsletter that I send to second degree connections, which I used to do and don't anymore. Fortunately, the newsletter has helped a lot in that area. And then being very intentional about outreaching to people that I think are talented or interesting. Like there's a guy in town, Joe Lonsdale, who he apparently around graduation time or shortly before has his assistant line up conversations with like 45 or 90 of the most entrepreneurial college graduates in the country.
Oh my God.
He then schedules calls with each of them in 3-minute increments, has like his assistants handing him like 2 or 3 phones, and basically is just like, hey, Danny, I'm Joe. How can I help you? And just like has his team go to work for some of the most talented soon-to-be graduates in the U.S. And he has funded these people. He started companies with these people. He's done a bunch of shit. And like, that is insane. Like, it's so amazing. That's what a 10 looks like to me. And I want to like get to that point at some point.
The more that I do this podcast, the more that I realize how people are at the heart of everything. And it sounds so obvious, but the more that I've seen how people operate, it's like the people who have the most connections and the people who have the deepest connections with those people are the people who are the furthest ahead, it feels like. Someone listening to this is in college or is in, their first few years of working. What can they do to help themselves? Obviously, you gave a bunch of great suggestions there from going from a 4 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10, but specific to that person who is in college or is about to graduate.
Yeah. So I feel like I did a lot of work here, honestly. I grew up in the DC area, relatively introverted, went to school at University of Pittsburgh. Like I'm not like a Stanford, Silicon Valley, my dad's a CPA, not like a super well-connected family or anything. And so I think 2 things. One, the free work thing that I talked about is unbelievable. I did free work I moved to San Francisco shortly after graduating to be in like the startup scene. And I did free work for 5 or 6 people where I would just email them. I'd be like, hey, your site sucks. Here's what I would do. Here's like the emails I would send. Just put like hours of time into just sending this thing. And that allowed me to meet so many people that were doing amazing things in the world that I didn't have any business meeting as like a 22-year-old, grad with no skills. The second thing I think is really useful in what I did is when I was in Pittsburgh, I realized that I was bad at meeting people and I was bad at like one-on-one conversation. And so for a year, I literally made a challenge and emailed a bunch of people in the Pittsburgh startup scene and entrepreneurial scene and took 3 to 5 people out to coffee a week for an entire year. So 1, great for network. 2, great for building social skills. My first one, I remember just sitting there and being like, what do I say? It was like so bad. Like it was so bad.
Why were you so bad? Was it because you were homeschooled or is that unrelated?
I think that was related. Yeah, for sure. I just think I was an awkward dude, I was like introverted and homeschooled and didn't have a lot of like social reps growing up.
So odd for me to imagine today and exciting like that you're just like the most personable guy that was your start point.
Yeah, I got married earlier this year and my mom at my wedding speech said like, it's amazing to see you as like this little introverted shy boy now like having all these friends and stuff like that, which is just hilarious, So I did that. And again, when I got to San Francisco, I was shameless about emailing people that I thought were doing interesting things. So at the time I was working on a 3D printing company. I emailed the COO of Heroku, which was like doing, anyway, it was like a thing that was doing something adjacent in software, what we were trying to do in 3D printing. he was like, yep, I'll grab coffee with you, come by my office. Went to his office, met this other guy who was playing ping pong there and had a 3D printer. We started talking about that. And then I ended up working with this guy for like 2 years, and I learned almost everything I know from that guy. And so just like, if you don't have a network, being unapologetically aggressive about cold emailing people that are doing interesting things in the world and asking them questions and being thoughtful and giving value to them, I think is the best way to build a network by far. It still works for me. I'm like pretty busy at this point, and it still works.
Yeah, same. Who are the most interesting people right now you find who are doing things that are going to be where the future is headed?
Good question. I think David Perell is one of these people. I love that dude. And I think that he has an insight on education and where the world is going in that realm that is spot on. I think that there are people that are doing, like Brian Johnson is doing a bunch of stuff with Blueprint that a lot of people think is weird, and it is weird. You know, it's weird how often he compares himself to 18-year-olds. But on the other side, he is doing humans such an incredible service. He's spending $2 million or $3 million a year on his body and his health and publishing all of it. It's like incredible. So that, from a health standpoint, I think that Mark Hyman has been really far ahead on a bunch of trends and interest in like functional and wellness. There's another guy, Sam Knowlton, who I look up to from an agricultural standpoint. Mike Johnson, I'm on this like consciousness neuroscience stuff. Yeah, I'd have to like go through my Twitter list, honestly.
Yeah. Well, no, what's really cool about this is someone listening to this, maybe they're not associated, or they send an email to David Perell and he doesn't respond. Find out the people who David Perell follows.
Totally.
And go through David Perell's likes on Twitter. Go through Brian Johnson's likes. Find their network. If you can't get those people,
totally.
Like, look at the people surrounding them.
Yeah. And honestly, to be honest, the people that those nodes follow are often doing the most cutting edge, interesting stuff. Yes. I follow some crazy accounts that I'm not sure if they're right or not. Like one guy is talking about how I've been interested in the impact of light on health and energy. And his whole thing is, what he says now is, he's like, I don't believe in any nutrition or health study because they didn't control for light exposure, which is true.
Wow.
And so if he's right, like that, you know, light exposure has crazy impacts on metabolism, mitochondrial function, all these things. It's true. We have never run an RCT or a nutrition intervention where light exposure has been controlled for.
Oh my God.
I could say the same is true of water in many ways. Like, we haven't actually run, like almost nothing in the nutrition research canon has controlled for water quality.
Wow.
Yeah, or emotional trauma, other people would say. There's all these weird things that I think if someone followed those people, it'd be pretty easy to, one, realize that like I'm kind of a weird dude, but also get in with some of these people that are like sub 2,000 followers on Twitter just talking about shit that I find fascinating.
Yeah, I think uncovering signal from noise there is like the skill, and obviously the skill that you have because you've put your money and time and energy into things that have actually worked. So what do you know about deciphering the signal from the noise that most people don't?
I think that deciphering that requires having an opinion on how the world works. And one of my, like, to use this light guy, for example, a lot of people look at that and they go, that's crazy. Like, that's just a stupid idea. And they write it off instantly. Why I think this is interesting is a couple things. He was also early in Bitcoin, kind of like first principles thinker, potentially. I'm like in my evaluating him for signal to noise phase, so this could be totally wrong in 6 months. But early Bitcoin, and what he is talking about and the way that he talks about things fits exactly into my model of health, which is basically that if you think of a human organism living 50,000 years ago, how that person lived was, you know, and that person is like biologically very, very similar to where we are right now. So how that person lived was they were eating fresh organic foods all the time. You know, there was no such thing as chemical exposure. They were getting super clean water. They were eating meat. They were eating vegetables. They were eating like a diverse diet of all these things. They were eating seasonally. And they were getting light exposure all the time. And so if I think my like way of viewing health is every time you remove the human organism from that like platonic 50,000 years ago sort of environment, you create disease where in the areas where like you furthest remove what a human has exposure to today versus what they had 50,000 years ago. Like our food is so different today than it was 50,000 years ago, and that is causing a whole host of health issues. I could say the exact same thing about light. Like the average person today is getting so much less light than they were 50,000 years ago, which is why when I come across this guy talking about this, it like perfectly fits my mental model of what causes disease and like ill health in the modern world. And so I'm like interested in paying attention.
Wow. Yeah, I love that you broke that down because that's very helpful for someone evaluating something on their own. If you enjoyed this clip, watch the full episode right over here, and don't forget to subscribe.